Bombshells, more than one, the theme of day number 2 in the Crystal Rogers Bardstown murder mystery trial. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for this special report on WHAS 11+. I'm Doug Proffitt. Steve Lawson is on trial for his role in the alleged cover-up of Crystal Rogers' death. Remember, cameras have been banned by the judge from covering this trial, but our reporters are sitting right there in that Bowling Green courtroom. They're taking very thorough notes. Plus, we are joined by WHAS 11 legal analyst Nick Mudd of the Mudd Law Group. He's going to be coming up right away. But first, Shay McAllister and Isaiah Kim Martinez are covering the trial for us. We want to begin with Shay. Shay, the prosecutor throwing one of those bombshells, calling the chief suspect's brother and mother co-conspirators in Crystal's death.
Yes, of course, Doug, this is something that stood out to everyone because Nick Houck's involvement is always a lingering question in this case. It actually got brought up by one of the defense attorneys who was asking John Snow, a former lead detective, is there any other suspects in this case? Is there anybody else that they're considering? And John Snow said, well, we've never named any other suspects, which of course they haven't, just right. Brooks Houck on record. But the defense attorney kept pushing, saying, well, who else is listed in the file? There's other names in the file. That's how Nick Houck got brought up for the first time. The exact quote here was, Shane Young asked, are you aware of the filing in this case that Nick Houck and Rosemary Houck are co-conspirators? And he said, of course, yes, in that case. He also said Nick Houck was a police officer. Who would be the best person to plan out a murder? And the judge cut him off there, which very interesting. He was trying to go somewhere with that.
Sure, and it's interesting you reported, Shay, yesterday when this this trial was just starting, before jury selection, right? Defense attorneys made one last-ditch effort to try to say, hey, we haven't had enough time to review all the hundreds of thousands of pages of documents, and they mentioned Nick Houck as a potential reason or things that could come up, things that they wanted to make sure they were buttoned up. So we continue to hear his name, and now, of course, Brooks Houck's mother's name brought up. Who knows, you know, going down the line if we hear them again.
There's this inference that they're connected, that they were part of this, but still, Isaiah, we've had no details on how. And honestly, not sure that comes in this trial or even the next trial, but Doug, that is something everybody's interested in.
Yeah, as you know, the brother and the mother, they aren't charged in this case. They've long been talked about by the folks in Bardstown over the past 10 years. What was the reaction in that courtroom when the prosecutor threw that out?
You know, it's a good question. Everyone in the courtroom was asked to not react, though, to anything. I mean, specific instructions on day one. No reactions, no signs, no writing of any kind. So even, Doug, when there is a big moment like that, when you look around, everybody stays very calm and quiet.
Although you can always tell with reporters, right? Whenever we're in the newsroom, or in a trial like that, everyone sort of leans in, saying, like, did we just hear what we just heard? And I'm sure that was the moment. I wasn't in the courtroom for that, but you were. I'm sure that was some of your fellow news members were doing that. Of course,
yeah. The journalists' ears were perking up.
Well, Shay, another point I know we want to cover here. The prosecutors also called a witness to dispute why Houck and Steve said they had a late-night phone call the night of Crystal's disappearance. Houck, in one of the very first police interviews between Detective John Snow, who's been testifying, calling him from the interrogation room. Here's what was said.
My question, I just want to tell you I'm sorry about everything that's going on in your life, brother, and I got you in my prayers.
I said it is a very difficult and trying time, but I appreciate you saying that. But hey, I need your help while I got you on the phone here. Do you remember the other night you called me really late, and I forgot what you asked me. Can you? I guess we wasn't on the phone. I might have been tired. I know it was pretty late at night. Can you remember what you asked me or what you were after? I can't remember.
Yes, sir, I can. I called to ask you for them numbers for a house.
Oh, for a rental house.
Yes, sir.
And what did I forgot? What did I tell you?
You told me that you would call. What's her name? Katie or whatever. She handles all that.
Crystal.
Crystal. Okay, I apologize.
Yeah.
And you said she handles all that, and that you would get back with me on it.
All right. Thank you so much, now.
Hey, if there's anything I can do, you give me a call.
Thank you. You have a good night now.
Yes, sir. God bless you.
Thank you.
So that clip right there is such a critical part of this case. Shay, you've watched it over and over again. Certainly it's going to be a big part of the next case starting June 24th. We just heard Steve there saying he called Brooks that night because he had a question for Crystal about a rental property for his ex-wife's daughter, Lauren Harden. Lauren Harden was on that stand today disputing that.
Yes, exactly. And not so much disputing what was said, but disputing some of the reasoning behind it, which was so interesting. This is one of those names that we've never heard. And today was full of them, names that we've never heard, people who we didn't even know were actually players in this case.
Even connections that are hard to sort of draw on paper.
Right.
You almost have to hear it one or two times
Right.
to know. Yeah.
And she was one of them. So Lauren Harden, she is Steve Lawson's stepdaughter. During that call, he says, "I'm looking for a rental property for my stepdaughter." We learned today that she was unaware that he was looking for a rental property for her. The exact quote was, Shane Young, the prosecutor, asks, "Were you looking for an apartment to rent?" Lauren said no. Shane Young said, "Did you ask him to call Brooks Houck for an apartment?" Lauren said no. She actually went on to say that she had rented from Brooks Houck and Crystal Rogers previously, so she had their numbers. She could have called them if she was needing an apartment, and she didn't.
Of course, the defense, though, had
Yes, and
brought up some of her past apparent drug use, Shay,
Right.
which, in a way, I'm sure the attorneys were sort of trying to discount maybe some of her memory of what she needed in that moment or conversation she had.
they did. They did point out, and she admitted that she was using drugs during this period of time. She was addicted to drugs during this period of time, and I think the question was, so that could have impacted your memory, and she said, sure. So
Yeah.
that definitely a good note there. But that wasn't the only person who's close to Steve Lawson that we heard from today. We heard from another woman who has a similar connection, a little bit different, but another stepdaughter of sorts, although her mom was not actually married to Steve Lawson. Her name was Elizabeth Chesser, and she has a child with Joseph Lawson. It's difficult to follow, Isaiah.
Yeah.
You and I were talking through this earlier.
It takes a few times to say it, right? This is Steve
Yes.
Lawson's son, Joseph, who's also charged in this case, his trials later. A woman that he had a child with, or shared a child with, that is who we're talking about, Elizabeth Chesser. So she was very connected to the Lawson family, Steve Lawson as well.
Yes, exactly. So she comes in because she heard a comment that Steve made. She says that Steve had said he was planning to leave his ex-wife, Tammy, because Tammy knew that he had committed a murder and she was going to tell on him. That was the exact quote. And this was considered another bombshell today, that there had been discussions of a murder committed, that people knew about it, and then nothing was ever reported to police here. And they actually did say, Darren Wolf, who is Steve Lawson's attorney, did say specifically, why did you not call the police? If you thought that this man who is living in your home or near your home had committed a murder, why wouldn't you call police? She said, I would be next if I had said anything.
Shay, you really get a sense, too, of sort of how prosecutors specifically are trying to build this case, essentially saying, here are people, in their words, right, who say that they were afraid to report red flags, again, in their words, because of possible retribution. Again, that is the case, you can tell, prosecutors are trying to paint to the jury.
Doug?
All right, we'll be back to both of you in just a minute. Shay, I'm glad you brought up the committed murder comment. Nick Mudd is joining me here. That has fascinated me all day long, Nick, because of the very fact that that was even uttered in a courtroom where this man isn't facing the murder charge. We know only one person has that murder charge. That's the chief suspect, Brooks Houck. Nick Mudd of the Mudd Law Group, and hired by WHAS 11 as our legal analyst. He has been talking about this case with us for a year. He knows most all of the attorneys in that courtroom and the prosecutors. What do you make of the point this woman said, well, Steve Lawson knew he committed murder?
The prosecution is slowly piecing together their evidence and their case for the conspiracy to commit murder. And they're doing so with every witness they can that has surrounded Mr. Lawson. They are obviously calling his son's, the mother of his son's child. They're calling a stepdaughter. They're calling people he worked with. And what they're doing is dropping tidbits here and there, but they're important tidbits, and they're trying to build that case, make that really it feels like a circumstantial, but really today we're getting more hard evidence here. I mean, we're getting people who are saying, like Ms. Chester did, hey, you know, she knew he committed murder and she was going to tell on him, and that's.
So you're telling me that that statement there can go toward the case of conspiracy to commit murder, which is what Steve Lawson is facing.
Absolutely.
One of the charges.
I anticipate the prosecution's going to use that tidbit specifically in their closing argument.
But she sort of said it as if he physically committed the murder.
Right. But again, as Shane Young, the prosecutor here, said in opening statement, we don't have to prove that Mr. Lawson committed this murder. We just have to prove he conspired.
A lot of bombshells came out there, but then the prosecutors were quickly poking holes in a lot of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, you mean the defense were poking
yes,
holes?
yes.
You know, and I mean, I get the going through the drug use, things like that. I mean, certainly they're going to cross-examine on everything they have. You know, the big thing is, which is what I would say if I was a defense lawyer, why didn't you report this then? If it was so important and that big of a bombshell like you're using it now, why are you 10 years later giving a sworn statement in front of a courtroom and yet you held it this entire time? And I'll tell you though, the best response that could be from a witness is, what happened? I was scared.
Yeah, I thought I'd be next.
Yes.
You had the Bardstown murder mysteries expanding. Tommy Ballard was killed. It goes back to Jason Ellis.
Absolutely.
On that Memorial weekend. Okay, let's talk about bombshell number 2, the co-conspirators. So they bring up Brooks Houck, of course, is the chief suspect in this. Then they bring up his brother, Nick, who was a former cop at Bardstown. And the mother, Rosemary, is conspiring in the death of Crystal Rogers.
You know, I think the defense here is the one who initially brought it up, and that's their job, right? They talked about all this extra discovery they hadn't looked at. And so at some point, you got to throw red herrings to a jury if you can. I mean, their job is to defend as much as they can and poke as many holes. And certainly the prosecution stood back up and didn't shy away from it and said, absolutely, both are co-conspirators here, potential co-conspirators, and the investigation's ongoing.
A lot was made of the cell phone records, tracing phone calls, placing Lawson next to her car along the Bluegrass Parkway. You've been fascinated by the cell phone evidence for more than a year in our discussions here. You believe, is that going to be the key, the overall evidence in the end for the jury that gets a conviction on Steve Lawson? And why?
I know the detective who testified. It's Tim O'Daniel from LMPD. He is an excellent detective. He's done a great job at prior cases that I've had with him and against him. Certainly, he testified that Lawson's phone pinged off a cell phone tower near Thompson Hill Road at 5:30 a.m. Then it pinged at a tower back on Bardstown Road around 6:45 a.m. Later pinged in an area near where Rogers' abandoned car was found on the Bluegrass Parkway. Okay, I know that things sort of changed for you in your opinion on this case today. We're going to get to that in a moment as we're going to rejoin Nick in just a second. Let's go back to Shay and Isaiah covering the trial. Now, Shay, we also heard from some people who worked with Brooks Houck. What did they have to say about what they were hearing on work sites?
Fascinating here, Doug. We were kind of given a behind-the-scenes look at some of the conversations, some of the happenings that very weekend and in the weekends before that Crystal went missing. The first woman we heard from's name is Stacy Cranmer. She was a contract worker. Right around 2015, she did different types of jobs on construction sites for Brooks Houck. And she pointed out, noticing the unusual activity at one of these work sites. She said she saw Brooks Houck driving in his truck with Steve Lawson in the passenger seat. And this was a red flag for her because he never invited his workers into his truck. They were driving around a neighborhood, she said, just chatting. She thought that was so weird. When eventually they do park and Steve gets out of the car, he comes up to her and she says, so what was that about? You know, that was weird. And this is the conversation, as she said on the witness stand today. He said, I have to go take care of this girl. I said, take care of her how? He said, just take care of her. I asked if he was putting her into rehab, and he said, no, I wish that was the case. He said the girl has 5 kids, which is mentioned to infer that it was Crystal who has 5 kids. So at this time, she hears this. She doesn't think much of it. She doesn't know what girl that he's talking about. But just a couple of days later, she starts noticing missing posters, things with Crystal's face on them. And she's automatically remembering this conversation and saying, okay, police need to know about that. So she calls the Nelson County Sheriff's Office. She leaves her phone number to report this information, and nobody calls her back. And
they were getting thousands of tips.
Exactly.
At that point.
I mean, they were inundated. And Jon Snow admitted that yesterday. He said we were nowhere near prepared for the amount of tips that were coming in. We were not able to return every single phone call. Interestingly enough, she does let it go for a couple of months, but in October, just a few months later, the sheriff at the time, Ed Mattingly, says, we believe Crystal Rogers is dead. We believe Brooks Houck is the main suspect. And at that point, Stacy says, okay, they have got to hear about this conversation. They need to know what I heard. So she goes to the sheriff's office in person at this point and writes it all down, puts it on the record, makes it official, back and forth with the defense attorneys here, trying to poke some holes. They say, well, why did you wait a few months to do it? Why did you think that this was an important thing for you to say? Why did they need to know about this conversation? And she said, well, I would hope someone would do it for me. I'm a mom of 4. I would hope someone would do this for me. She goes on to say they all have something to do with it. They've admitted to it. And if police had listened to me back then, we wouldn't have been here much earlier, which very interesting.
That's a strong statement. We're coming up on 10 years. You hear that, and things like that hold weight. You can imagine they hold weight with the jury, but of course the over sort of arching question that everyone is going to ask continually, even with some of the backup and tips, is why did you wait, right? And I think that'll continue to get brought up by the defense.
So not the only employee we heard from.
Sure, Charlie Girdley is another one, former contractor, worked with Brooks Houck back in 2015, did construction for him, of course, when this all started. And that July 4th weekend, Shay, you heard it in the courtroom, Charlie Girdley specifically said in testimony, quote, Joey Lawson in this case, says they could bury her with a skid steer and they'd never find her. I mean, those, obviously testimony, sworn testimony, those are strong words, right, to hear in that case, specifically coming from one of the 3 people charged in this case. There are other details, of course, in this as well. From Charlie Girdley, he says, again, a former employee of Brooks Houck, he says he saw Brooks hand Joey Crystal's car keys. We've heard a lot about that. And then I believe it was Charlie who actually picked up Steve Lawson from a home. Was it on Thompson Hill Road? And I believe he saw Crystal's car. Says he saw Crystal's car in the driveway there. That was before it was later abandoned. So there's some connections made there. He also didn't tell police about this when interviewed in 2015. So this is another sort of recurring message here, or in 2020, both times, 2015, 2020. And he says, Charlie, because he was worried about, quote, getting in trouble for something I didn't do. That getting in trouble, right, afraid of what's going to happen, that was where this testimony sort of circled around.
He was fully aware of what was going on behind the scenes here, but did not want to be connected.
Right.
And thought talking to police would do that to him.
Right.
So he mentions this conversation too, that Brooks wanted to get rid of Crystal. It's mentioned multiple times, get rid of Crystal. And there's discussion at these work sites about who might be the best man for the job.
Which connects all the way back to the final witness we heard from, and I know we got to wrap here. I want to get to this quickly though. We heard grand jury testimony repeated today from Steve Lawson. So these are Steve Lawson's audio. 3 different times in 2023, and in one of those moments of testimony, Steve outlines a conversation in that audio that he said he had with Brooks Houck, where Brooks, and I want to read you the exact quote here, I don't want to quote this wrong, he says the words, in a conversation with Brooks Houck, Steve Lawson says, quote, Brooks said he wanted his wife gone. Steve Lawson says, to me, it means he wanted her deceased. Steve says he responded to Brooks saying, you got the wrong guy here. And then Brooks said, allegedly, can you point me in the right direction? Steve answers back, talk to Charlie.
Right.
So it comes right back to Charlie Girdley, which of course is, what we were just talking about in that question of who's the guy.
And Isaiah, I love how you were listening to that testimony. I was not in the courtroom for that, and you came out and you're telling me about it, and it was like light bulb moment. Oh my gosh, okay, that's Charlie. We heard from him earlier today, and that happened all day long, Doug.
Yeah.
I also know that today the testimony ended talking more about Steve Lawson's cell phone. How were detectives able to track that cell phone, Shay?
So forensic experts whose full-time job is to look at cell phone data were actually brought in much later, 7 years, 8 years after Crystal went missing, to look at Steve's cell phone, Brooks' cell phone, Joseph's cell phone. They use search warrants to do this. And they work with the carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, to pull all of this data. And if you or I were to look at it, we would not know what it means.
Yeah.
But the experts can explain it.
It was very complicated testimony. Jurors actually asked multiple questions, Doug, after some of this testimony, specifically from a current LMPD detective who specifically works in the forensics unit, specifically for cell phone data. We heard from someone, an officer over in E-Town PD, and they described sort of how they break down this report as far as where they ping cell phones, where they can say, in general, the areas of where certain people holding those cell phones were at the time. I think the interesting part here, though, is with Steve Lawson. You mentioned this yesterday. His attorneys are saying, listen, the tampering with evidence, we're not disputing the fact that he was there. So the jury was sort of getting a sense of like, okay, his cell phone was along Thompsonville Road, was along the Bluegrass Parkway. Not exactly surprising, but it was the deleted phone calls that I think got some attention, because it was the E-Town PD detective, the officer, who said that according to her investigation that she has seen multiple phone calls deleted from Steve Lawson's phone. She testified this today. One of those calls, July 8th, to Brooks Houck, and it lasted over 2 minutes. So whenever you hear deleted phone calls, right, that is an immediate sort of gets your attention, and I'm sure it did with everyone in the courtroom as well.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you again, both. Getting ready for day 3 next. We want to wrap it up here as we once again bring back WHS legal analyst Nick Mudd here with me on the set. Nick, let's go back to Charlie Girdley. We talked a lot about him, but you highlighted one comment that was not brought up just a moment ago. Why is that one catching your attention?
He testified that Lawson said Houck wanted to get rid of Rogers. I mean, that's huge. That is huge. And Lawson saying that, Lawson been aware of that, that means he knew that a conspiracy, or that he knew there was a plot, that there was a plan to get rid of her. He knew Brooks Houck's intent was to get rid of her.
So this guy Girdley's talking to Lawson.
Right.
And Lawson says that he knew that Houck wanted to get rid of Crystal Rogers.
Correct.
So a lot of these conversations, I want to ask you, do they fall under the category of circumstantial evidence in this case? Is it enough to convict Steve Lawson?
It really comes down to the credibility of the witnesses a lot of times. Does the jury believe what the witness is saying?
So who's the most credible so far?
That's difficult to say, but I mean, I'm not in that jury box. They've got a big, tall order. But remember, they're being asked to convict someone and potentially put them in prison for 10 to 25 years. And I think most jurors realize the gravity of their job, and they take it serious, and they judge that credibility, to a T. They're paying attention.
Who's doing the best job in the courtroom, the defense or the prosecution at the moment?
They're both great lawyers, okay? Both
You
great
know them.
lawyers. Yes, I know all of them. They're great lawyers. Today was a big, big day for the prosecution. I mean, I think today really busted it open, the day that we've been waiting for. A lot of testimonies come forward, implicating not only Mr. Lawson, but also Brooks Houck.
You know, legally, whether or not if it's enough to convict Steve Lawson, as we already know, his own defense attorney has said, yes, he tampered with evidence.
Right,
he went to the car there on the Bluegrass Parkway 10 years ago, 4th of July weekend. So the jury's going to have an easy decision on that because of what his own defense attorney said. But now we're going to look at the conspiracy to commit murder charge. Whether a lot of this information is circumstantial or not, Bardstown, the folks who have followed this so closely, they're learning a lot of new information from witnesses who we had not heard from before.
Right, just like us. I mean, there's been tons of testimony today, witnesses we've never heard about, testimony we've never heard about, conversations we've never heard about that happened between Brooks Houck, between Stephen Lawson, between the people that work for Brooks Houck.
So your opinion on the possible verdict in the end of this, which, by the way, is still expected possibly sometime on Friday, could be as late as Friday night. This trial is moving fast. The judge has not let any delays happen. He's really been moving along. Your opinion on the possible verdict changed today. Tell me about where you did stand going into today.
I think the tampering, it's going to be a guilty. The defense has conceded that. The conspiracy, it didn't seem like the prosecution put much forward to tie Steve Lawson before today. And now, after today, I mean, they've certainly put a lot forward to make the case that he knew there was a plan to murder Crystal Rogers, and that he knew that Brooks Halleck had intended to do so, and that he was a part of that plan.
So if he's found guilty, does that set the blueprint for what we could see coming up June 24th, when that's when Joseph Lawson, his brother, and Brooks Halleck, son, excuse me, the son, and Brooks Halleck, they go on trial together? Right.
I think you're going to see the exact same witnesses in that trial. You're just going to see a much bigger piece of the pie. You're going to get not only cell phone records from, Mr. Lawson that we have in this case, but you're going to get records from his son and Brooks Halleck presented. You'll probably get other witnesses as well. I mean, if they've got this in this case, I'm expecting several more witnesses, including these in the following case.
And at this moment, have you been surprised by the number of witnesses who have been pulled out of the woodwork here?
Shane Young's a great prosecutor. He works hard. His team, I know his team, they're great prosecutors. They've done their investigation. They've done their homework. And certainly they came to play ball today.
If this case were to go to a jury by Friday, tomorrow, which will be Thursday, is going to be a real critical day, right? I mean, could tomorrow feasibly be the wrap-up day and then they just turn it over on Friday?
They're moving very quickly, but, it seemed to be that they intended to close their proof by tomorrow, and then the defense may have a small case to present Friday morning.
All right, Nick Mudd continuing his excellent breakdown and analysis with you. Thank you very much, Nick. Nick of the Mudd Law Group right here in Louisville. Speaking of that, the trial resumes tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. That's Bowling Green time. They're on Central Time. We're going to have coverage throughout the day on WHAS 11, and I invite you to follow our excellent blog on WHAS11.com. That blog is written by Joseph Garcia of our web team at WHAS11.com and Shay McAllister, and along with Isaiah, providing information from the courtroom as the judge allows them breaks. That's how this is happening, folks. No cameras in the courtroom, no real-time reporting at all. When they get lunch breaks or any kind of break, they're able to come outside and give us the latest updates, and that's when you see them posted on WHAS11.com. And then we're going to be right back here at 9:30 p.m. and at 11:30 p.m. on the free WHAS 11 Plus app for a closer look at the day's proceedings. That wraps up day number 2. Thank you very much for watching.